first off, just wanted to touch on what the agenda is going to be here today. We're going to do some quick introductions, and we're going to jump right into it. The first thing we want to do is define what cloud-based video services are, because I think you're probably all in the same boat. You know, cloud has sort of taken on a life of its own and can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So we're going to try to, describe what we think cloud-based video services are. Then we're going to talk about some of the different deployment approaches that you can go into when you're deploying cloud services, some of the other deployment considerations such as bandwidth and security, things like that, and then Q&A. But as I've mentioned, we'd like to have the Q&A as we go through the session in general. So my name's Andy Howard. I'm the moderator here. I have a consulting firm called Howard & Associates that helps enterprises deploy video solutions on their networks, video streaming, video conferencing, and increasingly the integration of those two into unified communications. So I work with companies like Deloitte Consulting, WellPoint, and some other large enterprises to help them deploy anything from a CEO broadcast to video call center applications. I've been in the industry for a long time. I've been at this show for a very long time. There's a lot of familiar faces around. I used to work at vBrick Systems for a number of years, and prior to that at Cashflow, which is now Blue Coat Systems, where I helped implement the first streaming media caching appliance back in 1999. So I've been around for a while. Our esteemed panel here consists of David Boyle from Oracle. Why don't you raise your hand, because it's not in order here. Tim Baldwin from Haivision at the end there. David Shea from Kaltura. And David Gibbons from Ustream. So I'll let you each give a quick introduction, and then we'll get right into it. Why don't we start right here, David?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is David Gibbons. I worked for about a decade for Avid Technology, a very traditional hardware and shrink-wrap software vendor that makes equipment for people who produce video. And in the last couple of years, I made a transition to some cloud-based video services companies, including Ooyala, and lately to Ustream. I'm here on behalf of Ustream, where we're very excited because we're changing our direction as a company to be all about providing the kind of cloud-based video broadcasting service that I think is going to be interesting to folks at this show. So we're very pleased to be participating at Streaming Media East, and very happy to be included on this panel to discuss the ways that can really advantage enterprises. I think regardless of what they're trying to do, whether it's launching new products or doing internal communications and shareholder communications, there's a ton of applications that enterprises can take advantage of, and we think the future is very bright in that direction indeed.
Well said. I'm David Boyle, David number 2 on the panel. I work for Oracle. I do not speak on Oracle's behalf, and I am not representing Oracle's cloud business. I am here today as a customer of services. I work in brand marketing. My team is responsible for pretty much all things video, external-facing video, under the umbrella of corporate marketing and brand marketing. At Oracle, that would include webcasting, asset management, studios, publishing, hosting, CDN delivery, all that good stuff. So again, in the customer chair today.
And I would be, I guess would make me David number 3. David's my last name, so Shai David. I'm one of the co-founders of Kaltura. I see some familiar faces, so some partners, customers here in the audience. We deliver video for both media, educational institutions, and a lot of enterprises, both for large Fortune 100, Fortune 500 customers, as well as small, medium businesses. And we'll talk later, but I think part of the topics we'll cover today is how every company is a media company. And we'll talk a little bit about what cloud means for simplifying that transition of every company being able to participate in the benefits that accrue to those that take media seriously, and how providers like us can help simplify your life.
Okay. My name's Tim Baldwin, and I'm the not the David on the panel. So I'm here representing...
That makes it the Goliath.
I'm the Goliath.
Oh.
Yeah. I'm here representing Haivision, and Haivision traditionally has been in the space of IP video delivery, kind of behind the firewall on the LAN. And over the last, I'd say, 2 years, we've been moving towards branching out, over the firewall to internet streaming and delivering video over the internet, and integrating both our behind the firewall solutions with over the internet streaming. And I drive kind of the technology side of that business.
Okay, great. So let's, when we had a pre-call and we were talking about, how we're going to take this panel, the first thing we had to define even for ourselves was, what is cloud-based video services? So does that mean you're not deploying the hardware on premise anymore? Does it mean you're buying a software as a service from an organization? What exactly does that mean? So I think the first thing we want to kind of lay out is, what is your definition of cloud-based video services? But first I want to see, how many people out there would say that you're doing something with video in the cloud today? Okay, so quite a bit. What about, would you say you're 100% cloud? Anybody just all in for the cloud? A couple people are. So most people are deploying kind of a hybrid solution? Okay, good. That
Could I
sets
ask
the
a
stage
follow-up?
pretty well.
For
Yeah,
those
go
of you
ahead.
who are all in, what do you mean by all in? What services would you consider underneath that all in umbrella? I saw your hands both go up back there.
We're all from Ustream, so we're like,
Oh, okay. All right. No fair, no fair.
So
Conflict of
Ustream
interest.
is all in.
This gentleman here?
We're, as an organization, we're a franchise organization, we're very lean and mean, so we have very little infrastructure at all. We put everything up.
By everything you mean,
Anything we deal with video is on.
okay, all right, good.
All right, so let's let's open it up. When Ustream defines the cloud, how do you define that?
So one of the things we like to concentrate on is keeping things as simple as possible for people, because for a lot of businesses, video and all of the complexities that go along with video isn't really their focus or isn't really their business. So in our world, what we like is that people can simply present a stream to even a simple piece of desktop software. From that point forward, as it gets encoded and uploaded to our cloud, we'll take care of everything else. Stream transcoding, storage, recording of the stream so it can be played back later, live transmission to lots of different players, making sure it's encoded appropriately to be targeted to any kind of different device, capturing the analytics about exactly how it's being used, and even giving a range of kind of conditional access tools in the cloud that allow you to scope who's entitled to see this and where can it be embedded and how can I verify later that that actually happened. So in fact, to use Ustream, there's no download of anything. And you're doing pretty much everything from the point where you took your stream, made it first available as an RTMP stream, and distributed from there forward. So we feel like it's the best approach for organizations is to have as much of that happen in the cloud as possible, particularly since for most organizations, their use of video is very spiky. It's around product launches, or it's around annual events, or it's around shareholder meetings. And when it's spiky, if you're investing to have that capacity on hand all the time, then for something like 90% of that time, your investment is actually sitting idle and being wasted. And that's where the cloud can really help businesses.
David, how about your perspective from an end consumer of products and services? What is your definition?
Well, my definition is, I'll tell you, we've been using what we call today cloud services for quite some time. Software as a service, as defined, is technically a cloud service. So webcasting platform could be defined as a cloud service. An online video publishing platform, such as Kaltura, could be defined as a cloud service. Content delivery networks could be defined as cloud. Metrics platforms, analytics platforms that sit outside of our firewall, that's a cloud service. And the more you think about it, the more you realize we've been using the cloud for a long time without even really knowing it's the cloud. So to my boss, Larry Ellison's frustration with the marketing around the word cloud, it's nothing new, guys. We've been doing it for years. It's just that now I think everybody's hitched their wagon to the cloud term from a marketing perspective. So there are very mature aspects of what services sit in the cloud that have been proven over years of hard use. The things that we're looking for today to add to our complement of services that we procure in the cloud include such things as encoding, multiple device support, custom encode profiles, so we don't have to maintain separate encoder hardware on site. for live as well as on demand. What you said, David, about spiky capacity, we sometimes call it burstable capacity, to deal with large event requirements. Those are things that we're very interested in. In addition, the move by desktop software providers such as Adobe to provide their services in the cloud interest us to the degree that it facilitates collaboration and access to work in progress for things like review cycles and collaboration and working collaboratively with agencies and other entities outside of our firewall as if they sat inside the firewall. So that's kind of where we sit today, where we've been, where we are, and where we think we're going.
So I obviously kind of agree with that, but I think there's sometimes what I would call illegitimate pressure to move everything to the public cloud. So in addition to what's been said, I think one important distinction as we set out to kind of delineate the terminology here is to distinguish between private clouds and public clouds.
Yep.
There's a certain amount of things that you can get a lot on the public internet, on the public cloud. You can go and you can provision services. So Microsoft has a big presence here, Amazon, obviously. And you can go and you can do that. But for a lot of organizations, that would be too big of a leap to do that in one big step. There's been, quite a few decades of investment in existing infrastructure, whether that is for security reasons, for existing infrastructure investment as CapEx already invested in boxes, whether that's for acceleration and be it that video files sometimes are very large, and if you have a global team, sometimes you do need physical presence in order to accelerate delivery, and those big files that everybody wants to collaborate. Sometimes you're talking about gigs of file, and there's something called the speed of light, and you can only try and move files faster than that. So when we think about the cloud, I think about it a lot of times from an end user perspective, and one kind of very simple rule of thumb to know whether we're consuming cloud services is to think about how are those services consumed. If it's consumed through a browser, you're probably consuming some sort of cloud service. It's a very simplistic test. I'm not trying to encapsulate everything. But where that cloud services are actually delivered from is a more complicated question. One of the things that we see in the marketplace, especially larger organizations, actually want to be empowered with their internal semi-public or even private clouds, right? When an organization like Oracle, or when an organization like an AT&T or United Healthcare, or think about large organizations that come from the software, IT, or services, or any of those industries. Finance would be a good example, where there are certain requirements around compliance and security and what they can do with the data. Sometimes you can deliver that entire solution, but empower an internal group to deliver cloud services to the rest of the organization. And for us, that would also count as cloud services, although it doesn't go all the way to the public cloud.
So just touch on that a little bit more. I know there's a lot. I think there's a lot of confusion in the market about what is a public cloud, what is a private cloud. So you were making a distinction there. Can you
Sure.
describe what you mean by the difference between those?
So I think you can even make not only two, but probably three, maybe more. But to simplify it, I'll focus on three different buckets. One is I would call it completely public cloud. You get a machine, call it on Amazon Web Services, they call it AMI. You have an image, you got root access to that. You're sharing that infrastructure with God knows who, right? Some of those public cloud services, potentially for good reason, would actually claim that that's actually quite a secure solution because your data is completely distributed. Nobody knows who else are you sharing those infrastructure with. And using virtualization that we all know, you're getting your own private version. It's like my 5-year-old. It's make-believe, right? It's like you imagine that you own a piece of the cloud. Everybody wants to own a piece of the cloud, and you can do it really cheaply. The benefit of that, it's cheap, it's readily accessible, and to David's point about burstable capacity, you can scale that pretty much instantly, pretty much infinitely, right? So that would be kind of one end. If you move one bucket to the next, then you could have dedicated capacity on the public cloud, but with pre-reserved instances, where you know that you're getting pre-reserved capacity, which you're going to pay for, but now you're not sharing resources. Okay? Somebody else goes and buys the hardware. Somebody else contracts with an electricity provider. Somebody else has to worry about cooling and resetting service and whatnot. But you have pre-reserved instances. The benefit of that is for some security scenarios that might be safer, at least perceptually, because you're not necessarily sharing that infrastructure. And you also have guaranteed capacity that would guarantee some performance. Normally, the public cloud vendors would guarantee that you can scale, but they wouldn't guarantee a service level. How fast could you get that extra server on Amazon? Nowhere in the SLA would it say that, right? Whereas if you're reserving capacity, you know that you have that. I think the next bucket, the third bucket, would be people that don't want to be on the public cloud at all, but they want to replicate a cloud environment for their own. I'll use a Bank of America, big bank. They run their own public cloud infrastructure as an example. Hundreds of applications are running on that. The accounting department, the payroll, different people might run different application, but that type of network never reaches the public internet. They use the same technologies that a Microsoft or an Amazon would use to render the public cloud in order to render a private cloud for internal stakeholders inside the organization. And we can complicate that, but I think those three buckets pretty much capture the bigger picture.
What's Haivision's
Yeah, I mean,
definition here?
if I kind of touch on that, I think maybe there's another category in those three. And if I just take an example like Akamai, a CDN. So, I mean, in one way we can call that a cloud service. It's definitely not public cloud service. It's kind of like private cloud services that that you're still that you're not operating in house. And someone like an Akamai or any of the other CDNs, of course, they've been doing delivery and storage for a while, and they're going to, over time, they'll add other capabilities like cloud-based file transcoding and even live transcoding at some point. So it's kind of, so I think it's somewhere in between being a full private cloud where you're paying a cloud provider to give you dedicated resources. It's between that and a complete public cloud, just like an Amazon or a Rackspace. But I think you can still consider that to be some form of like almost private cloud type resources.
So, I have another thought on this. I think the guys have kind of eloquently laid out the angles of the cloud debate and why and where it might make sense depending upon the application that you have. As I think about the video application in particular, it's so bandwidth intensive, its burstiness makes it really hard to deny the advantages of being in the cloud. If you're thinking about another enterprise application like databasing or some, keeping track of customer financial records, there's some very difficult considerations about security and reliability that you have to think about. And the bandwidth requirement is relatively low until you scale to extremely large customer volumes. But as we know, on the internet, half of the bandwidth is being used to stream video. It's the really most data-intensive application that we have. And that being the case, it's extremely hard for any company to construct a good economic case why they should build that infrastructure themselves or why they should even manage that infrastructure themselves. So I think in the case of video in particular, distinctly from other types of cloud applications, the case is really compelling. It's something that it makes a ton of sense to do in the cloud, and there's a ton of value to be unlocked for enterprises by approaching it that way. And I just think that's worth thinking about as we kind of debate the use of cloud in all kinds of different places. I think the reliability question was a question for a while. People were worried about, for example, reliability of transcoders and thinking maybe that's the place to have hardware investments. But I think that's changed recently as well, and at this point there's not even a strong reliability case to be made against cloud processing for your compute applications as well. Any thoughts on that?
It's interesting to also think about what kind of SLA you can get from the providers. So, I mean, if you're looking at, on the delivery side, you could look at Amazon's CloudFront for delivery. That's kind of, more public, or you could look at a CDN. I'll pick it on a different one, maybe Limelight or Level 3. And there's probably different SLAs that you as the customer are going to get from those vendors. And so that's just another thing to keep in your mind. Some of the video you're delivering is critical, and some videos maybe not so critical. So depending on how critical your video is, you may want to make sure that the cloud, the type of cloud service you're using and the vendor providing it can meet the types of SLAs that you need for the type of video you're delivering.
Yeah, and some other considerations when you're looking for cloud providers, dependent on the application, depending on the market space that you play in and the type of company that you are, there may be unique security, regulatory, or other regional requirements regulatory requirements, privacy requirements, or others that you may want to pay close attention to before committing. Because as we have found, having good information about the standards by which your relationship and exchange of data with those vendors will be judged may vary widely from industry to industry and region to region.
So I mean, maybe a specific example, you know, if you're in the healthcare space, then you have HIPAA compliancy to worry about, you know, and you definitely are not going to distribute video over the internet unless you are fully, you know, HIPAA compliant. Whereas if you're in the, you know, movie studio broadcast space, then there's completely different, you know, security and encryption requirements. So
That's right.
yeah, every vertical market kind of has its own, and some of them don't have much at all, but they all have a different level of security needs.
Yep.
What about from the crowd? Is there any other definitions, or if you have a question too, feel free.
I'm not much of a network guy, but I know in our environment we frown upon our internal enterprise people going out to the internet because our internet pipe is more limited than our WAN pipe. So if video is being hosted on the cloud, technically our end users that are in our network will be using the internet pipes to get that video, which again, our internet pipe is being shared by, you know, in our environment. Is there a mechanism that'll cache that content internally? I think that would be the biggest thing in my environment to kind of get, you know, our network guys on board.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot where your end users are going to be viewing the video. If your end users are predominantly on the internet, it makes no sense to do anything other than utilize a CDN to distribute that content to them for the points that David made. But if your end viewers are typically on your enterprise network, having them all go out to the internet to pull down the same stream doesn't make a lot of sense from a networking perspective. So typically, in an enterprise environment, you're going to see both. You're going to utilize the CDN to deliver content to your internet users, and you'll utilize either multicast or some sort of caching technologies to distribute that across your WAN links on your private links. So yeah, it's kind of, again, a hybrid approach depending on, you got to know where your audience is coming from, and you need to
work off my plate and give it to these guys.
Well, you're in the right place. I mean, the people you need to talk to are here, who can custom craft a solution for you based on the type of content you need to deliver, what sort of bursting requirements you need. Is it live content or on-demand content that can be cached? What are the security requirements? And then is there an internal CDN that you could use to cache that content and replicate it? And then on the in that internal distribution picture, you could use technologies such as peering or internal multicast replication.
Absolutely.
There's all kinds of solutions. And as I said, this is the right place to be.
I think it's probably true to say that, you know, almost all organizations are realizing they need a blend of both. A lot of people turned to video in the early days as a great internal communication tool, and then when they realized how powerful an external communication tool it was, they all started to become media companies, as David was saying to me earlier. All organizations are in this transition as they become media companies, and I think that everyone's going to confront exactly the problem that you have hand in hand with the problem of getting their message out to the entire world using video, and everyone's going to need a blended approach that allows them to be actually incredibly capable at reaching in huge audiences externally, as well as able to solve that internal problem of how fat is our pipe to the outside world.
One of the things that we've found is it depends on the industry and the culture of your company. But in our case, we have developed a very strong partnership with our internal IT organizations and have been able, by working through this partnership, to show them that by consulting with the expertise in the various practice areas within marketing, education, internal training, that IT can actually better be able to pitch those capacity expansions as added value for the organization. So it isn't just about, oh, we're worried people are going to watch YouTube and Netflix. Well, think of the value that you will bring to your employees by giving them free access to that information, rather than closing off the Great Wall and saying, you know, none shall pass. So it's really, it's about what is the content, where are the users sitting, and what is the business justification that IT can use to go get that bigger pipe? Because it's a reality. I mean, and if you know, I'm sorry to take up the time, but this is a really important point. We talk about the changing nature of the workplace and recruitment, right? Look at the services that this current generation of new hires is used to accessing at home and on the road. They want to be able to work from anywhere, and they want to be able to socially network, consume video, consume rich content while they're at work. And if your corporation or organization constructs that none shall pass edict, they're not going to be as inclined to potentially come work for you. So that's a consideration as well from an HR perspective.
I think if you don't have a Cisco shirt, though, a lot of the IT and network infrastructure, they look at the service as more of a streaming thing, a video thing, which is, you know, in priorities, it's maybe second or third in the
Sure.
enterprise, you know?
Sure.
And I just think that's the hurdles to communicate those to the right groups who listen.
Absolutely. Let's talk later.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
if you're not a technical person, you really need to start making some friends in the IT organization, though, if you're going to be in this video space in the enterprise. And you know, one of the things is you can look at other opportunities to leverage costs. So one of my clients needed to put in a caching infrastructure because they wanted to stream to iDevices and Androids, and they, you know, that's HLS, which is all HTTP content, so they needed caches in place, and they found out that the people that were distributing the software to the desktops were having huge challenges doing that, so they ended up sort of partnering on the purchase of that equipment because it was quite expensive. But you know, so there's other things kind of going on in the organization, and it makes sense to get friendly with other pieces.
Yeah, you know, one more comment on that. I would say IT organizations tend to give priority to the things that the management of the organization says is important. And as we're all discovering, the ability of video to inspire your customers and to fire up your internal workforce in pursuit of a mission or a goal is unmatched by any other way that you can reach out to them. It's, you know, short of a CEO personally visiting every employee of the company, there's no other way that you can actually deliver that message with the same power and the same ability to move people's hearts and minds. So I think that as people wake up to that fact more, the conversation will get a lot easier. It'll just be a case of pointing out how powerful it is as a medium, and the IT departments will realize there's few investments that they can make that are actually more leveraged than making sure that everybody in the organization is able to experience the same message that you're trying to give to your customers.
Well said.
Okay, let's talk about some of the deployment approaches. We sort of talked about this a little bit, but we wanted to focus on a few applications which we think are particularly well suited to the cloud. So the first is, it's actually second on the list here, but it's probably the most commonly known, is encoding. How many people out there are doing some sort of encoding or transcoding in the cloud today? So a lot. So yeah, so that's starting to become a pretty frequent application. I think one of the most powerful applications that can be moved to the cloud that a lot of organizations still do in-house is media management. And I think that's where a lot of the moves on some of the vendors here on the panel are going to. So how many people out there are doing some sort of media management out in the cloud? And is that for your sort of external marketing delivery, or is it also for your internal corporate communications?
External, raise your hand.
Mainly internal.
Mainly internal, but you're still hosting it out in the cloud. Okay, great. So you know, there's clearly a trend here in organizations and service offerings allowing the media management to move to the cloud. So you know, Ustream's making a pretty aggressive move into that space. What are some of the things that are advantages to companies when they go that route?
Well, I think the first and most obvious one is just that, as we all know, managing video media is messy, right? Mm-hmm. It's just not very straightforward. And every time you get your arms around the problem expands. A new device becomes available, or there's a new trend in consumer electronics consumption, and you realize that actually the scope of the solution that was around before is no longer equal to the problem as it exists today. And as an enterprise whose job is to do something else other than make and manage video, eventually you start to recognize that, wow, we're sinking an ever-increasing number of resources into something that isn't actually even a core activity for us. And those are usually the markers of a problem that you should seek to externalize or outsource in some way. And to me, that's why the idea of having someone else whose expertise is concentrated in making sure that video is available on every device and that management problem is easy goes hand in hand with also just not having to think about what is the scale of storage requirement that we need, or what is the scale of I/O bandwidth to that storage requirement we need, or what is the scale of compute capability that goes along with the rate at which we're generating new video. Being able to not have to think about all those problems is actually a tremendous source of value for enterprises. And I think that's what, it's usually that pain that kind of puts the motivation in place for people to investigate the cloud-based solutions to begin with.
I think, a very simple example or similar example would be something like Salesforce.com. You're not building your own CRMs anymore, right? You're using an external CRM that's totally cloud-based, and and that's not even as complicated as video. And the landscape for CRM doesn't change nearly as fast as the landscape for video. So if you're using an external CRM, probably makes sense to be using external experts on video delivery, keeping up with, when you're at a show like this, you hear HEVC, you hear Dash, you hear, the landscape is constantly moving, and the companies that focus on this space are keeping up with it. They're continuing to update their products and services to stay current, and it makes a lot of sense just to rely on that expertise and not try to keep it in house.
And to build on that, I'll quote one of my mentors, one of our advisors, is a guy named Brian Bellendorf. He's the founder of the Apache Foundation. You've all used this technology because he wrote Apache, which powers like 70% of the web. And he says that software of any variety, and definitely content management software, is more akin to lettuce heads sitting in a warehouse than gold bars sitting in a safe. And what he means by that is there's bit rot. If you implement this CMS or video CMS in this case, and you're like very happy about it, oh, we just solved the BlackBerry problem, and then there's an iPhone and Android and whatnot. Oh, we just got our complete hands-down workflow for Facebook, and then there's Instagram and Pinterest and all that stuff. So it's like lettuce, it's rotting, there's bit rot. And to build on the previous point, I think the trick is to give the people that have that investment and the ability to continue innovating in that. So I think that's one way to look at it. The second way, which would support the same conclusion, is this notion that video is dynamic in a second sense, which is you want to get it from sensor to retina. There's a lot of video out there in the world. It's a town hall meeting that Ustream might want to stream. It's a digital archive that's sitting on some tape, and all of a sudden you're doing a 50-year anniversary for the company and you want to digitize it, right? It's a product demonstration. We keep thinking about video, but it's not necessarily a talking head. Maybe it's a screencast of a new product feature for internal purposes for training the sales rep, and then it goes out to the market and you want to open it up for partners and then point of sale or whatnot. It's live TV, live linear, coming off some satellite channel, and you want to respond to that because you're an organization that has something to do with news. So all of those pieces of content are coming out at you at kind of the 30 frames per second on one hand. On the other hand, video is being consumed at all these multiple points of consumption. It's on mobile devices, both internal and external. It's on your web, it's on your internet. It's freedom to operate by cutting content deals and being able to distribute your content to trusted partners and non-trusted partners. It's about being able to route across those different routes. I kind of call that the butterfly problem, where one wing of the butterfly is all this content coming in, second wing of the butterfly is all that content coming out. And those, we know, everybody in this room knows that that butterfly is shaking their wings pretty wildly these days. So keeping the body of the butterfly light, I think, is what gets the butterfly up in there, and that's where the cloud comes in. So if you can concentrate on that management system that's going to route from A to B, and every single person in this room has that problem of routing content from some source to some consumption point somewhere, making sure that that pathway is light is probably a very good recipe for success.
I agree with that, and I think that in addition to the need to keep that pathway light, for most enterprises, the pathway is very non-testable until it's too late to discover that you disappointed your
Until
customers.
there's a failure.
Right, yeah, exactly. You have this tremendous news to share with them, but to test how good you are at delivering to 100,000 people simultaneously is not possible. There's no way for an enterprise to do that. And then by the time you figured out which tweaky aspect of it didn't work out right, the news is over and the customer is disappointed and you failed to actually deliver on
we all
the
saw
excitement.
that. I don't know how many people saw it yesterday. So Yahoo announced this $1.1 billion acquisition of Tumblr, and the live stream failed. Anybody that wanted to watch it live saw an error message. And it's particularly sad for Yahoo because they spend a lot of money. They bought Broadcast.com, they bought Maven Network. These guys spent hundreds of millions of dollars insourcing technology, and they still couldn't get the stream, which Ustream could have done for them for
If there's one thing to take away from this panel, it's that you could sink hundreds of millions of dollars into this problem and not have a solution that you would want.
Unless you go to the cloud. Unless you go to the cloud.
Unless you go to the cloud.
And people who focus on it day in, day out.
Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, that's
The anecdote I always like to share when particularly IT asks, how many viewers do you expect to see on this live stream? How much capacity do you need? Predictions are difficult, especially about the future. So what I like to say is, if you don't know, it's better to buy more, but I'm not sure CapEx is going to come in that fast, right? We're not going to be able to buy enough encoders and install them and configure them, and then what happens if we don't meet capacity? Then I'm going to get questions. You bought all this stuff and we ended up not needing it, and now it's now my fault. So one of the luxuries, well, not luxury, but one of the benefits of a scalable service in the cloud is that you give a ridiculously high number. You can say, oh, I think we're going to have 1 million streams, and if you only get 100,000, then you probably only pay for what you use. So something to think about.
Yeah, question?
Thank you. One of the things I like about Salesforce and Dropbox is I don't have to deal with IT to get it. Are there solutions out there that I don't have to deal with IT 6 weeks backlog to be able to get video streaming and deploy it, get my department, my team using it without having to go through all that mess?
So yeah, I would say yes. Yes, there are straightforward self-serve software as a service offerings that you can sign up for. Ustream is one of those, and they are. I've often heard people talk about the model of how new technology comes into enterprises and how 20 years ago, it was kind of the top down. The corporate buying occurred where they, some bright people sat around and said, we need a XYZ system, and let's go out and get 7 different vendors to give us an RFP, and then we'll decide which one we like, and we'll choose one based upon cost and capability, and we'll insist that everybody in the company deploy that. And that model has gone out the window. Nowadays, people are, doing what they did with Gmail and Google Calendar. There's sort of a few people here and there are going, this looks pretty good, and it solves this shared calendar problem that we have. So we're going to start using it in our department, and it doesn't seem like it messes with anything, so that's going to be okay. And then eventually, the organization realizes we actually have 50 people doing this in little squally groups in different places. It's time we actually embedded it in the whole organization and brought it in. And I think you'll see the same thing occur with cloud-based video services as people, and we're seeing that at Ustream, people are in individual departments are starting to use it in different ways that perhaps even a corporate buyer might not have anticipated if they'd done a search for the right solution. And then eventually the organization realizes this is a fundamental capability we need to have, and it's time to make it available across the entire organization.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point, and it brings up, I think most of us are aware of the buzz going on about marketing driving purchasing decisions in terms of customer contact points. And one of the benefits of this approach is that in the old days when you would conduct an RFP and then you'd choose a technology, it'd be a year later before you deploy it, and lo and behold, you're behind the market. So it has advantages, but again, it's disruptive. So I would recommend speaking with your management about that approach, just to make sure that they're on board and that you have support, and that whatever you build doesn't get thrown out when they discover that it doesn't pass muster with the higher-ups.
Wait, a couple of points over here.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, how do you address concerns by those in info security or corporate compliance that, you're taking business records, media-rich business records, and you're putting them out there. So how can you ensure that they're going to be protected and managed properly and so forth? How do you respond to that?
So I would say every type of broadcast has its own security requirements, and they scale very widely. If you're sharing information about your product, you probably would like the world to know and have no restrictions on how it can be consumed. If you're sharing information about your company's strategy, then some of the time you want that to be known everywhere, and some of the time you want that to be internal. And then if it's truly an internal CEO town hall, you probably have even stricter requirements. And every company has their own comfort level with what the right degree of security that's appropriate for that content should be. So I think the key is to find a vendor that has a scalable security offering where you can actually ratchet up the security on a per broadcast basis, so that, you know, for some types of content, you do actually have to use an LDAP login that's the same as your Active Directory or your corporate IT login to get access to the content. But in some cases, excuse me, you need not much more than internet access from the organization to get there. And then there's in-between approaches where you might be choosing a password or a geo restriction or an IP filter of some kind. And, you know, so long as you have that range of different approaches available, then you'll truly be able to deploy the video cloud-based service you have for all kinds of business applications. And I think that's pretty key, to be able to use it for everything as opposed to having it only narrowly capable of a few tasks.
Yeah, I would echo that sentiment and reduce it down to its essential point, which is choose the right partner. And the other essential point is connect with your internal information security folks to determine, based on what content you want to publish, what guidelines and rules govern the distribution of the content, requirements for encryption, content protection, entitlement, and authentication.
And I think, just to put it in kind of formal terms, one way to think about it is to think about media security as physical security, just like you secure your house, right? So it's probably a good idea to lock the door. You might want to put bars up, right? You might want to have an ID system. You might want to have an armed guard sitting outside and pulling their gun out, right? And I'm just making a joke out of it, but it's authentication, authorization, entitlement, access control, geo-blocking, encryption. There's a wide variety of tools in the security toolbox for media. For each type of different content, for each type of different use case, you can use those tools to varying degrees. And there's a cost. There's a cost you'll have to pay for the vendors. There's a cost of ease of use. You know, if you got to download a specific player that could decrypt encrypted content, that might come at a price of a lesser user experience, for example, or delayed in the playback, or whatever other, or CPU usage on your desktop devices. And you could probably engage the internal stakeholders to create a map where you can show the benefits and the costs that accrue to those different use cases. We found in the past that a relatively simple way to do it is to distinguish your content between channels, where some of them are private and some of them are public. Some content you put it in a public channel, that's the content that you'd actually like people to find. That's the type of stuff you probably put on your website. You probably also syndicate it to your YouTube channel, if you have one, right? Versus a semi-restricted channel. This is type of content that it's for internal users. It's probably next product release and stuff like that. But if it somehow found its way to YouTube, it wouldn't be the end of the world, right? And then there's like the really strict content. Like that's the next product release. That's the corporate secrets and whatnot. That's probably something you want to encrypt. That might be something that you actually want to manage only the metadata on the cloud and actually keep the physical assets within your possession. So you can deploy that wide variety. And one of the things that we found as a best practice is get the information security people involved early. Because if you don't get them involved early enough, they have a game they like to play. They call it Trump the Champ, right? and you're going to present a business case and a vendor solution and whatnot, and some smart dude is going to come in and say, oh, but in that case, that, and like the whole solution dies. So get them involved early, and you get their buy-in.
Now, what you might find is prevalent today is the IT guys have your ports blocked. So to kind of relate to the previous question, the way it's handled today is you can't get any streams out. You know, and so that's why it's really important to bring the IT group into the discussions early. So I mean, while there are SaaS style services out there today, if your IT group already has proxies and firewalls and stuff in place to block any of this data, you're not going to be able to use them until you get the IT group on board with what you're doing. And to do that, you're going to have to get the information security guys on board with what you're doing. So it'll be a process to work through.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing that you said. And one of the things is, going back to your question, it depends on where that content's going. If it's going out to the internet, you could buy a service. If it's all 100% internet, you can buy a service. Nobody would really know about it because that content's not coming back into the network. If they start seeing huge amounts of video content coming back into the network, they will immediately recognize that something's going on and not be too happy about it.
Just a little follow-up on this whole thing.
Sure.
Before I asked that question, you had mentioned the case of perhaps small groups within an enterprise creating Ustream accounts. And that's
Correct.
not good either. I mean, if they're allowed to do that and allowed to pursue that, that's kind of a back way of getting approval, right?
Yeah, so in, in the examples I was thinking of, they weren't doing anything that was contentious from the security point of view. The most natural entry point for Ustream into an organization is actually the marketing department, and they're the ones with the news that needs to be shared with everyone, rather than the news that needs to be kept closer. But I think we're all seeing video used for just an increasing range of applications, and it used to be you would never make a video unless you wanted the world to see it. That was the point of video.
Yeah.
Now, there's all kinds of applications where it's sort of in between. It's like shareholder meetings. We don't mind who sees it, but we want to know later who did.
Yeah.
That's like a very nuanced version of security, all the way through to, no, it's really a private internal discussion available to employees only, but it is a global employee workforce, so we want it to be available everywhere in the world, even for some people who are connecting from outside of an office. They're just connecting from their homes because they work from home, and yet we want certainty that it's really secure and that they didn't, that nobody who shouldn't see it would get to see it. So,
Well, it's like Skype,
yeah.
Everyone wants to use Skype, but corporate security departments do not like Skype.
Right.
For a multitude of reasons. It's not the standard, you want to do video conferencing, you have to do it this way, firewall traversal, all that stuff. So,
Yeah.
Well,
Great
the
point,
other
yeah.
thing about getting the InfoSec people involved early is that then you don't get unrealistic expectations put on video, which people tend to do, right? So in a lot of cases, people say, oh, it's video, and they hear about DRM. So they say, we have to have DRM for our video, which is very complicated to deploy. And then,
Onerous, yeah.
but if you got in there up front and say, well, we have our SharePoint site hosted offsite. We don't encrypt all the content that's on that site. We encrypt it. We require a login. We encrypt it in transit, but we don't encrypt the actual files, which is what DRM typically would do. You can make video just like any other data file that you have, any other data type that you have, so you're not getting unrealistic expectations on video.
We're running businesses, and we need to innovate. We need to have rapid deployments. We have to worry about what our competition is doing. We have to worry about time to market. And if we're constrained, we need to show business justification and the drivers behind it. And if IT in general is not providing the services to the outbound marketing organizations, for example, that those organizations need, it's a natural reaction to go and get those commonly available services by hook or by crook, especially if they're free, to execute on those business requirements. So if the argument is we need this so we're going to do it, IT can respond, no, you're not, we're going to shut you down. But if you develop a partnership to show that by either supporting these consumer-based external services or by building it internally, you will support us better and provide value, then it's IT's decision to make whether they build it or whether they buy it. And believe me, they're going to buy it because they don't want to resource and scale up infrastructure if they don't have to. So if you bring that compelling argument, you say, look, there's technology in the marketplace that will satisfy your concerns around encryption, authentication, access, entitlement. There are technologies that will make it less burdensome on our internal systems and on our WAN gateways, our VPN, whatever it is that they have concerns about. If you show them that you can give them the tools to go to their management and say, look, the business needs this, what can we offer them? That to me, that is the approach we have used. And actually, the reverse has happened in recent years. Our executive management, our CIO, in fact, has driven very aggressively video within our enterprise because he gets the value. And if they're not getting the value, that's where you start. You sell them on the value, sell them on what it brings to the business, and you say, we're the customer for your IT services. How are you going to support us? And if you don't, we're going to go around you, and they don't want that. That doesn't look good for them. So that's the approach we use. We're not aggressive about it. We're not contentious about it. We have a partnership, and that works for us.
How much
Question.
of the cloud services are you using for live streaming and live encoding?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
How much of the cloud services percentage-wise are you using for live streaming and live encoding?
How much of the cloud services are used for live streaming and live encoding?
versus streaming pre-recorded video? That's a great question. I don't think I know the answer. I think that live is definitely got an ability to retain and engage audiences that VOD can't always match. In fact, what we typically see is people will watch anything from 10 to 20 times longer if it's live news or a live feed. And that also plays out in the world of broadcast, right? The top 10 rated shows on the TV networks are the ones that are delivering something live because it's an experience that can't be duplicated very easily. So I think some of the most fascinating things that are happening as live streams, and I think that the percentage is increasing for online video over time, but I don't know what the actual number might be.
So we have some interesting statistics that we did actually as a customer of services like that. We gathered some statistics about how our webinars were being used, and we use a variety of technologies to engage our audience for our internal marketing. When we sell our services, we use a variety, including our own technology, WebEx, GoToWebinar, and whatnot. I think that we saw a pretty even split between live and on-demand. So if we did a webinar, about half the people would watch it on the day off, and over the next 60 to 90 days, we would probably double the viewership. So if one of the measures that you're trying to measure is impact of something like a webinar, and it costs a lot of money to produce the content and bring the speakers and run the event, you could probably double the impact by keeping a VOD copy on that. I think I'd agree that that live in itself is becoming a greater portion of the overall basket of services. If 3 years ago we would sell services into enterprises and a live event would be an anomaly, now almost everybody has some sort of live component in the basket of services that they want to consume. I think that if you measure it, and again, this is anecdotal evidence, but if you measure it from a bits produced perspective, to go back to that butterfly, like in the sources of content, how much of the content is actually live that later finds its way to on demand? It's still a small but growing percentage. Most of the content out there in the world is content that already exists. It exists in people's hard drives, it exists on tapes, it exists on existing libraries of content. As time goes by, more and more people would do live, and part of the big reason for that push is that more people have the means of production, right? If up to 5 years ago you needed a $10,000 camera to get HD, today everybody that has an iPhone has an HD camera. So as time goes by, we can anticipate that more content is going to be produced live because the amount of people that have the sensors live is growing dramatically.
As an organization, we see unique benefits to producing live content, engagement, length of view. I think the recent study, I can't really quote it, but live has a lot of traction, and it creates buzz and excitement, especially around product releases and customer events, community events, and doing things like integrating live interaction with that content so that your audience feels like they're a part of a larger community, a virtual event, if you will. Very compelling in certain use cases. Risky, yes. Expensive, probably more expensive than on demand because redundancy is really important. Failure is not an option, as the Yahoo, the rather sad Yahoo example points out. So it really depends on how risk averse you are in your event strategy, but there are definite benefits to live.
All right, well, we've got about 5 more minutes here. I was going to just ask, when we kind of touched on all these different deployment considerations, with the exception, the exception of cost. So if I'm a customer and I'm looking, I've got 2 options. I want to deploy, let's go back to the media management example. I want to deploy media management software. I can either buy it, I can put it on my own servers on my premise or in my private data center, and I can deploy it that way, or I can buy it as a service from a provider. What am I going to look at from a cost differential? I mean, talking generalities here. Obviously, it depends on the customer, but it's a operational expenditure versus a capital expenditure up front. So there's going to be lower upfront cost, but potentially more cost over time. Is that kind of what you're seeing, or is it the fact that you don't have to over provision your hardware even drive the ongoing cost lower?
Yeah, well, yeah, so that's a great question, and I think it's, as I was saying earlier, it's very hard to make a case for how managing that internally is going to work out less expensive. It's easy to persuade yourself to underprice the cost of having the infrastructure internally, but once you add up not just the physical hardware and the space that you need to put it in and the cooling and power you need to give it and the constant upgrades to operating systems or application software running on that hardware and the highly paid personnel who are responsible for maintaining and ensuring high uptime for that hardware, and then layer on top of that the cost of any deployed application software that you might need to install on desktops around your organization to give people access, because you've taken that approach as opposed to building a fully internal cloud approach. Once you truly and honestly add up all those costs and then factor in the burstiness factor that we were talking about earlier on, I guess I challenge everyone to do that and to find an example, unless you're at an incredibly large scale as an organization, where it is actually more cost effective to go that approach than to go with the cloud.
In our case, we try to simplify it for our partners and customers by not giving them an option. And by that I mean that we just abandoned completely the model of traditional enterprise software sales with like one lump sum in maintenance. We just don't do that at all. Even if you want to go private cloud or you want to go public cloud, we offer a subscription service. So it's a pre-known, preset fee that is tied to some business metric where you know what is the lifetime cost and lifetime value of the software. Whether you want to take it to your private cloud, it might be more expensive, it might not. It really depends on who you are. If you're an infrastructure as a service provider, if you're a software company on yourself, offering cloud services to others, you could probably buy the hardware cheaper than we can, right? So in that sense, having us run the software for you probably is not going to save you a lot of money. On the other hand, if you're smaller organizations and you got to calculate the cost of hardware, electricity, manpower, co-location, redundancy, and whatnot, then sure, I completely agree with you. But so we go to customers and we say, this is going to be so cheap compared to the business benefit. We'll create a subscription model for you, so here's your quarterly or annual license fee, and for that you get that much. And in that sense, what IT organizations, what business units want more than anything else is predictability.
Yep.
They know how much it's going to cost. They can derive their internal ROI calculations. And the ROI, and this is where I completely agree with you, the ROI is very easy to demonstrate. And then it becomes an arm wrestling exercise of pennies on the dollar. Could you squeeze the value? Could you squeeze the cost to provide more value or not? But it's so cheap compared to what you get, then it makes it really simple for people to buy.
Well, once it's in that budget line too, it's harder for it to come off, rather than 3 years down the road you have to justify that expenditure again for another whatever hundreds of millions of dollars worth of equipment that you need to buy this
Right,
time.
and just to state the obvious again, we talked about it earlier, but this is a rapidly changing area of business. So subscription makes double sense. A, it gives you predictability, but also it guarantees that you're on the latest version, right?
Yep.
You don't need to think about, am I going to support Android Gingerbread, because on full screen when you click this, it blows up, right? You don't have to think about things like that.
And there are soft costs around competencies in your IT organization. Whoever's going to be supporting that infrastructure, that you got to train them up, go out and recruit the people who know how to run this stuff. You're going to end up having a vendor run it for you anyway, and you'll still have the same problems.
Exactly.
What about Haivision? What have you guys seen? People been receptive to the cloud model that you've been?
Absolutely, and like was just discussed, we also do the subscription model, which I think just makes it much easier for the customer. They know what what it's going to cost, for every month or quarter or year, and it's once they get it in the budget, then it's there, and justifying the value of what they're going to get versus that monthly cost is not difficult. So we do the exact same model.
All right, we've got about 1 more minute. Is there any more questions from the crowd?
Real quick, is there a support model, tier 1 support with this type of service? Users have issues, do they call us and we call our firewall guys, or do you guys support any type of tier 1 service?
So if that question is directed at Ustream in particular, yes, we do. We have a 7-day phone support and also a variety of email and other resources that allow our users to do support. But of course, sometimes events go on at times outside of normal business office hours, and we offer a variety of paid support packages to support specific events, as well as the standard phone support for end users.
Yeah, there are a couple. I mean, there's kind of two ways to slice that. That is, there's support for the viewer. So if I'm a viewer watching an event and nothing's working, and somewhere you have some support information, who's behind that support line. And then of course there's for the content producer, there's the support for you. But you want to keep both of those things in mind. If you're doing an event with 100,000 viewers, then you do need to make sure you have a support infrastructure available that can take a hotline that can take phone calls from the viewers saying, oh, I'm getting buffering, whatever, and help the viewer work through those issues. Most of the time it's on their side, it's on the viewer's side, not the event is happening, it's being delivered over the CDN or whatever. But if it's an important event, and especially if it's a paid event, then you do want to make sure you have some kind of support system set up for the viewers where they can call and get some help.
So there's no bucket service that does the hosting, the management, and the support?
No, I mean, I think probably all the vendors can provide that type of support.
Yeah.
One
It's
way or
usually
another.
part of the
Yep.
subscription service,
Yep.
and then you can purchase additional levels of higher support if you want to.
And we recently stopped selling support and started selling what we call customer success packages. So everybody gets support. There's 24/7, all the vendors offer that you can call up if you have an issue. When we offer people to subscribe to what we call a Gold or Platinum customer success package, what that means is in addition to the normal support, they would get dedicated resources to help them plan their events, plan their strategy, think through issues like compliance and security and stuff like that. So they have somebody that they can call. Probably they know him on a first name basis after a while. They have their cell phone. And they can say, okay, we're planning our Q1. We have a big live event. We have some VOD. We just acquired another bank and we want to integrate. And that customer success manager now works very closely with them to offer support, not only on the technical level, but also on migrating business issues, et cetera.
For viewer support, there are companies, basically kind of call center companies that really specialize on this type of thing, and what you can do with them is you basically set up an arrangement with them for a particular event, and a few days before you have some calls with them and you train their operators who are going to be picking up the phone. So I mean, we've used that on a number of large events where we'll actually hire out a separate organization, which that's what they do. I mean, they run phone support, and it's just a matter of training them so they can do that kind of that level one debugging first before they would come into our team directly. If there's something bigger than just is your Ethernet cable plugged in, is your Wi-Fi turned on, those kind of things.
We had one more question. The gentleman in the glasses here. Can you take that? Yeah.
So the conversation about video generally in enterprise is interesting. I'm wondering if you guys have a perspective on post-production and the cloud services for enterprise.
Yeah. That was one of the things that I mentioned in my intro, and we're very interested in looking at proxy-based editing and web browsers because we have distributed teams. We have a studio in UK and in Singapore and headquarters. We want to be able to share assets and access to those assets and metadata and create edit decision lists and rough cuts and ingest and log in the cloud. Really interesting, and there are many, many vendors who are spinning up those types of services in the cloud that we're looking at.
Yeah, I think you see.
IT impact that is important to watch out for?
Well, if you are throwing large original uncompressed files out to your regions, I think there will be impact. But there are also technologies that can deliver over UDP and other protocols very effectively and efficiently over the public internet, encrypted with QoS and acceleration. So that's the answer to that question. But in terms of the actual workflow in a proxy, impact of a proxy-based workflow, it's very lightweight. So that's very interesting.
Yeah, and you saw a couple weeks ago, Adobe announced they're no longer selling box software. So you're going to go in that direction eventually anyways.
It's still downloaded software. I'm wondering about software as a service.
Well, they're moving to subscription models and not even selling the desktop versions anymore. Right?
Yeah, but I think the point you're making is it's a subscription service, but
you
you're
can still
downloading
download
a
the
thick
stuff.
client that sits on your desktop machine as opposed to a web client where you're actually doing the production there. And I think I have some exposure to that, to the kind of impacts that workflow can have from my days at Avid. And I think the current vendors, and like David said, there's a lot of people chasing that space because it's likely to be a direction for everyone. And the current vendors are thinking very carefully about which aspects of the production workflow does it make sense to move into the cloud. And I think what we'll see and what we've seen so far is a lot of concentration on collaboration and the advantages that cloud can bring to the collaborative aspect of video production, but still people using heavy clients on their local desktops to do other tasks like heavy graphic processing or other things where something creative needs to occur first before people can collaborate on whether they like that. And I think the combination of those things will actually be incredibly powerful and lead to much slicker workflows for enterprises that allow them to produce video that can be made available in multiple languages much more quickly and are suitable for consumption around the world, as opposed to the old waterfall model of, the head office made this thing and threw us a DVD of it. I guess we better figure out how to use it in our country. And, I think there's going to be a lot of positive impacts from that.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're out of time here. I'm sure the panelists will stick around for a few more minutes if people want to come up and ask questions. But thanks, everybody, for coming. I thought it was a great session. Thanks to the panelists. And enjoy the reception.